Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show, I wanted to talk a little bit about Sunday's game between the Michigan Wolverines and the Wisconsin Badgers that took place in the Big Ten. And if you missed it, Michigan ended up getting the win in Madison by a final score of 67-59. And I totally understand. When you look at this game and this box score and really this whole Michigan and Wisconsin context game from afar, you're going to say, okay, Michigan is a top 5 team. They're going on the road to face a top 20, top 25 Wisconsin team that is full of veterans. And Michigan went on the road to Madison and beat them. So why is that a big deal? Why all of a sudden on this podcast are we going to be out here talking about it? And I think that when you look at this game and when you look at how important and why it was so important that Michigan got the job done, you're going to understand why I decided to talk about the Michigan Wolverines on my show today. And Michigan has been a team that so far this season has been enjoying a very good season. Now, 2020, 2021 is a different season. We're all dealing with the pandemic. We all know that players and coaches have to be wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. But Michigan, you could tell, when they were playing basketball to start off this season, they were really looking forward to it. They were enjoying playing together, and they were making some pretty easy work out of the Big Ten. Before the game against Wisconsin yesterday, Michigan was in first place in the Big Ten basketball standings with a record of 8-1. And unfortunately, their season got shut down for the time being a couple weeks ago because the new strain of COVID that is from the UK that apparently compared to the other strains of COVID, it's a little bit more contagious. So that new strain of COVID apparently entered the University of Michigan campus, and their athletic department reacted by not only shutting down the Michigan basketball team after they didn't even have a positive test, by the way, but they shut down the whole athletic department, the whole thing, every sport, everything. And the basketball team didn't even have a positive test. So this was a Michigan team that was off they didn't play in a game in about a month. They didn't practice for 3 weeks, and they were going into a really tough situation going on the road to Madison against the Badgers. We all know historically just how hard it is to go into a place like the Kohl Center and beat Wisconsin even without fans. And I remember after the announcement dropped that Michigan and their athletic department would be shutting down for a couple weeks, their players were not happy about it. And rightfully so, I thought, because I understand that we all have to be out here taking this pandemic seriously. We all have to be wearing masks, washing our hands, all that kind of good stuff. But I found it a little ridiculous that we're going to literally pause the team season for 3 weeks, even though they didn't have a positive test in the program. But that's whatever. There's nothing we could do about that now. What's done is done. What's in the past is in the past. And I loved how in this game against Wisconsin, Michigan was able to show toughness. They were able to respond to adversity, and really, they were able to just flat out flip a switch. There was a point in the first half where the Wisconsin Badgers were up by 14 points. And I'm not out here saying the Badgers are going to win the national championship or are all of a sudden, the best team in college basketball. But this is a Wisconsin Badger team that I actually predicted to win the Big Ten before the season started. I was very high on the Badgers, and we saw these Badgers earn a couple of big-time wins throughout the early portion of this season. When you look at their blowout win against Louisville, you look at I know Michigan State isn't great, but they still went on the road to East Lansing when we still thought Michigan State was okay. They went and beat Minnesota. That was at home. They beat Indiana at home. They've had plenty of big wins this season, and Wisconsin's a tournament team. They're like a 5 or a 6 seed. I don't think anyone is going to have any issues with them being in that range in terms of their seeding. But the point being is that Wisconsin is a really good basketball team, and they are a tough team to beat when you are on the road at the Kohl Center. Things are going well for them. And in the game against Michigan here, you saw the game change with that Brad Davison elbow. And you saw that Juwan Howard wanted to do whatever he could to get his player, Mark Smith, involved following the elbow from Brad Davison. Wisconsin was leading by 10 with, I would say, a little over 18 minutes left in the game, and Mark Smith, Michigan's point guard, went to defend a layup attempted by Davison, and with that process, he forced a miss, and Brad Davison's left elbow struck Smith in the jaw and sent him crashing down hard onto the court. He grabbed his face and was down several minutes as play was halted, and the Wolverines bench was actually given a technical foul for arguing the no call on Davison, which stood after the review, and that elbow really was what ended up firing the Michigan Wolverines. And I understand that when a teammate gets hurt, it's obviously instinct to fight like that and get the job done for your teammate that was lost. But at the same time, and Mark Smith wasn't lost, he ended up going right back into the game, but at the same time, when Michigan and that whole foul to Mike Smith occurred, my thought was that, okay, if Michigan wants to show everyone how good they are, and they want a really impressive win, they're going to take that elbow from Davison to Smith and the fact that Howard got teched up, they're going to take that and use that to their advantage and maybe just turn it into a rally and go ahead and win this game. Because that is what good, and more importantly, that is what great teams do when they handle adversity. And that is exactly what Michigan did, because Wisconsin did not score a field goal in the last 4 minutes of the game. Michigan went from down 14 in the first half to leading by 4 minutes with a minute to play. They ended up getting the win, obviously, and I was just so impressed with how Michigan was just like, okay, that little elbow from Brad Davison, and keep in mind, it's not like that's a surprise. Brad Davison has been making those kind of plays since his freshman year at Wisconsin. To be honest with you, I'm surprised he hasn't really gotten into more of these to-dos, considering how he plays, but at the same time, Michigan was able to take a mistake made by the Wisconsin Badgers, and kind of like that Michael Jordan meme where he's like, oh, and I took that personally from The Last Dance. I kind of feel like that's what happened to Michigan here. They needed whatever they could coming off of the COVID month off and the no practice for 3 weeks. They needed anything they could to provide them with a spark, and they found that spark, and they were able to take advantage and go right at Wisconsin and be able to get the W. And if you're a player for the University of Michigan, it has to feel really good knowing that your coach in Juwan Howard has your back, and knowing that your coach really will be willing to fight for you, even with officials at any times when it's warranted. And that's really what happened yesterday. You saw that Juwan Howard getting all fired up regarding the technical foul was really able to give his team a spark. Here's another thing I wanted to say about Michigan, right? Throughout a lot of this college basketball season, there have been talks of, okay, it's Baylor, it's Gonzaga, and it's everyone else. But I do think when you look at the Michigan Wolverines and the way they're built with their length and their defense, especially the way their defense was playing in the last 4 minutes in the game against Wisconsin, I think that they are capable of winning a national championship. I really do. I think they're capable on a good day of beating a Gonzaga, of beating a Baylor, and I'm not saying that about every team that's out here ranked in the top 10. I think the way Michigan is built from a personnel perspective and a coaching perspective, I think on the right day, they could handle a Baylor or a Gonzaga just because I think they have many different ways to beat you. The crazy thing is, in this game against Wisconsin, was that Michigan ended up getting the win. They had the big 14-point comeback, all that, but they really didn't even play well. In the first half, Isaiah Livers was really the only Wolverine, I thought, that was out here playing with any kind of confidence. But then, as the game went on, you could tell that confidence really started to rub off on some of his teammates, and they just rode it from there. And when you look at the University of Michigan, I think they belong in the conversation based on the season that they've had with the Baylor and with the Gonzaga in terms of teams that could possibly win a national championship. And Michigan right now is projected to be a number 1 seed. The fact that they only have 1 loss playing in the league as hard of the Big Ten is pretty ridiculous, and they're looking really good right now. They have a home game coming up against Rutgers on Thursday night. They will then head to Columbus, and how about that? Next Sunday, 1 o'clock, CBS. Michigan at Ohio State. Feels like the Evan Turner days we're going back to. That is going to be one heck of a game. 3 versus 4. That is going to be an absolute war. Michigan will then go to Indiana. They will host Iowa and then go to Michigan State. Right now, there is no scheduled meeting for Michigan and Illinois. Unfortunately, that game was canceled during that big COVID hiatus for the Wolverines. But here's another thing about Michigan I wanted to realize. Keep in mind, the thing about Baylor and Gonzaga and a couple other teams at the top of college basketball is like part of the reasons why they're so good is because of continuity. We know that Gonzaga returned a nice core of players that played together last year in Kispert and Ayayi and Timmy. And then when you look at Baylor, they bring back basically their whole team with Butler and Teague and Mitchell, all those guys. But Michigan lost their 2 best players from last year's squad. And really, the 2 guys that were the heart and soul of that team. If you're a Michigan basketball fan and you watch the Wolverines prior to this season, you know how impactful and how important of players Xavier Simpson and John Teske were. John Teske was a guy that just got better and better and better throughout his career at the University of Michigan. Xavier Simpson was one of the best defensive point guards I've ever seen at this college level, and he is one of the best point guards in the University of Michigan basketball program history. Those 2 guys were that good, and Juwan Howard loses both of them, and with a team full of guys who were from the squad last year, Isaiah Livers, Franz Wagner, Eli Brooks, he's taken those guys along with some transfers and some freshmen and has turned Michigan into one of the best teams in college basketball. And Juwan Howard would be my vote for National Coach of the Year. What he's been able to do with this team through adversity, through playing in such a tough league like the Big Ten, through COVID pauses, I think he deserves a ton of credit. And one last point I wanted to make about Michigan, right? The Wolverines were in the offseason news headlines a little bit in the offseason because they lost a commitment from Isaiah Todd. Todd was a McDonald's All-American type kid who actually ended up joining the G League elite team, the new program in the G League. And also Michigan was trying to get Joshua Christopher, the 5-star prospect that is currently enrolled at Arizona State. And I'm telling you guys this. If Christopher or Todd was on this Michigan team, they wouldn't be the same team. They wouldn't be that good because you could tell that part of what makes Michigan so good is that they're upperclassmen, and besides Hunter Dickinson, who's phenomenal, but they are mostly upperclassmen who know what is the right shot to take. Hunter Dickinson, when you watch him, is a top 5 freshman in the sport. He's so fundamentally skilled and has a really nice basketball IQ. You look at their other seniors, Livers, Wagner, Eli Brooks, Chauncey Brown. They know when the right time is to shoot. I think if you had a kid like a Josh Christopher, like an Isaiah Todd, who was really playing with only one goal in mind to get to the NBA, I just don't know if that kind of playing style would fit at a place like Michigan where the team and the culture is so big. So I'm telling you, I think it's a blessing in disguise that those 2 guys both didn't end up in Ann Arbor, because if they did, this season would be going much differently, and who knows how good they still would be compared to now. So wanted to give a shout out to Juwan Howard and the Wolverines. They're playing phenomenal basketball.